You're all very welcome. We're really delighted to be here today with Dr Mary Guinan and also with the US Ambassador, Ambassador O'Malley. This is part of a series of events to promote science and technology education in the Midlands. And we think it's very important to acknowledge people that have left the Midlands or people whose family have left the Midlands and achieved a huge amount in science. And we couldn't think of anybody better to kick this off than Dr Mary Guinan. If you had a quick look at her book or on the website, I think you'll agree it's fairly impressive. Everything from the eradication of smallpox to early research on HIV and AIDS and a huge amount of other things in between. And we had a number of events yesterday in schools, and last night I came home to a series of emails and photographs from students who took photographs with Mary and were so inspired, not just with the actual story of the science, but the way in which that she tells it. There's everything from elephants to astronauts, so I'm not going to ruin what they're going to talk about. But just to acknowledge as well that we are supported in this work by the US Embassy's Creative Minds programme and also the Ireland Funds and Science Foundation Ireland. And to acknowledge as well the huge work that Dr Craig Slattery has done with us over the last couple of years. We've done very fun events like the science of chocolate, the science of coffee, and Craig has always come up with great ideas and been so helpful in helping us to promote science. So we're really looking forward to a great chat between these two great scientists today, and also we very much encourage questions from the audience, so don't hold back on that front. So I would just like to hand over to Ambassador O'Malley to introduce the event and talk a little bit about Creative Minds. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you very much. It is great to be here in the Midlands, and it is great to be here to kick off a Creative Minds program in Tullamore. So we are really proud to be part of a program with Dr. Guinan and to make it part of our Creative Minds program. We have been at Creative Minds for about a year and a half since I arrived in Dublin and became the ambassador here in Ireland. And Creative Minds is our way of attempting to create new collaborations and new connections between you, the young people of Ireland, and the young people in the United States. You are the next leaders of Ireland. And we want to connect you in many different ways with science, technology, arts, and culture, with your counterparts in America, because before you know it, you're going to be in charge. And we want to make sure that the great relationship that exists between the United States and Ireland today, and that all of us, people of my generation, and Dr. Guinan's generation have profited from through our whole lives, gets handed down to you. And the only way to do that is to make sure that we nurture that relationship and not take it for granted. There is no reason to think that the United States and Ireland would drift apart from where we are now, which is a wonderful relationship, both from the cultural and emotional side, but also from the economic side. The American multinationals doing business here in Ireland are doing very, very well. There are a number, and a rapidly growing number of Irish companies in the United States doing very, very well. And we look at Ireland as a true economic partner of ours. Right now, for example, the relationship between Ireland and the United States started out, as you all know, with the passage of immigrants from Ireland to the United States. Dr. Guinan's parents, my grandparents, were born and raised here in Ireland and went to the United States because the economy more or less forced it to happen. And over the years, those immigrants did not forget where they came from. And you've heard the stories of sending back presents and all of that at Christmas time with a few extra dollars. Well, those days are over with. Ireland has become a true economic partner of the United States. The companies that are here the American companies that are here are doing quite well because they can count on a well-educated Irish workforce. The companies that are here for a reason. They're here because they know that they can get workers in the EU, in Ireland, that they can't get anywhere else in Europe. And that, connected with the affinity that the United States has always had for Ireland, is a great help. The Irish companies that have gone to the United States that needed to expand and the best place to expand was the U.S., have done quite well there for exactly the same reasons. And the relationship has become so strong, and Ireland has become such a strong partner that right now there are more Americans working for Irish companies in the United States than there are Irish people working for American companies in Ireland. That is the strength of Ireland in this relationship, and you guys should know that. We Americans are dealing with a strong economic partner that we are proud to partner with. But as Ireland looks more global, as you must, and as the United States changes because of our demographics, which we must, we need to keep the ties together. What once was just immigrants sending packages back at Christmas time, and the affinity that Americans have for Ireland and that Irish have for America, is not guaranteed to continue on. So Creative Minds is our way of trying to connect up through today science, technology, and on other days music and culture, and on other days hospitality and restaurants and hotels. We've done animation series where we brought Pixar people over to deal with Irish animators to show them, to exchange ideas. Anything that we can do to create the sparks, to continue to create sparks and creativity, as you're going to hear about today, that's good for our relationship. So that is what we're trying to do with Creative Minds. There was one of the most creative minds, also an immigrant to the United States, Albert Einstein, is quoted as having said, "When I examine myself and my methods of thought, I come close to the conclusion that the gift of imagination has meant more to me than any talent for absorbing absolute knowledge." He continued on by saying, "To raise new questions, new possibilities, to regard old problems from a new angle requires creative imagination and makes real advances in science." So creativity is something, is very, very scientific. And I couldn't agree more that a creative imagination is at the heart of innovation, which is what we're going to talk about. That's also why President Obama has made such advancement of science and technology and engineering and math, the STEM process, a priority for his administration in the United States, and has especially encouraged women and young girls to participate in STEM. It's this next generation of scientists who will raise new questions and find new solutions to old problems. The more women and girls are involved in this process, the better we are, because women and girls will ask new and different questions and yield, as Dr. Einstein said, real advances in science. Science and technology collaboration is not only a fundamental aspect of what makes the United States and the Irish relationship work so dynamically, it's also essential to create innovation that's shared with our challenges. Science and tech innovations can stimulate economic growth, enhance energy security, contribute to open societies, and foster a global environment where invention, innovation, and industry can thrive. And Ireland is clearly an example of that. Ultimately, the cooperation strengthens our international relationships, because these disciplines are based on values that transcend politics, that transcend languages, that transcend borders, and transcends cultures. The current Zika virus outbreak reminds us that science and collaboration between researchers and governments of all stripes is more critical than ever in order to advance safety on our planet. As one of the first female physicians to work on smallpox eradication at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and one of the first physicians to work on the AIDS epidemic, Dr. Guinan exemplifies how scientific cooperation to combat diseases transcends borders and transcends politics. As she did all of these things during a time that clearly did not favor women. While controlling outbreaks, researching new diseases, and caring for patients and untreatable infections around the world, she has also smashed through glass ceilings. I hope many of the young people here will be inspired by Dr. Guinan's story and will benefit from her wealth of experience as a woman involved in this process. The United States and Ireland share many important research links in both academia and at both the academic and commercial sector. And since 2006, the U.S. government and the Irish government have funded the U.S.-Ireland Research and Development Partnership, sometimes referred to as the R&D Partnership, which funds ways that here in Ireland research can be conducted and that innovation can be promoted. So I'd like to really congratulate the team at the Atlantic Corridor for providing a fantastic platform for Dr. Guinan to share her knowledge and to amplify on the significant research links between the United States and Ireland. I'm really looking forward to a great discussion between these two fine folks today, and it's, I think, time to begin their discussion. I do hope, ladies and gentlemen and students, that you will keep creative minds in your mind and help us find ways that interest you into the kind of collaborations that you'd like to see between the United States and Ireland. Our goal is to make sure that your generation of Irish and my generation, the next generation of Americans, know that they have no better friends in the world than each other, and that we are both committed, on both sides of the Atlantic are committed to innovation and to imagination and to creativity. So thank you very much for having me here. It's great to be on this nice sunny day. And Dr. Guinan, I think it's time to start. Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. When Jackie and Gillian from Atlantic Corridor contacted me, and 4 months ago now at this stage, and in the run into this event, offered me the opportunity to be involved. They mentioned Dr. Guinan's name, and it kind of rang a bell. And then they mentioned Dr. Guinan's book and the title of it, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then I realised I had it on my to-read list. And then, like many people, the first thing you'll do is go and start Googling. And then I started getting very excited. I felt like I'd won tickets to the Bruce Springsteen concert at the weekend. So it's a real pleasure for me to be here talking to you today.
Thank you.
So to start with, I'm going to ask you about the title of your book. So for anybody who is any way interested in what we talk about today, this is an excellent read. Adventures of a Female Medical Detective. What's a medical detective?
Well, a medical detective is what's called an epidemiologist. But because most people don't understand what epidemiology is, I thought it would be much easier to use the words medical detective. There is a genre of books about medical detectives, and but none of them had been written by a woman. So I wanted to make sure that there was a woman included in the genre. So that's why one of the reasons I wrote the book and named it Adventures of a Female Medical Detective. The publisher accepted the book but tried to eliminate the word female, and I refused to allow that to happen. I said, no, it's important that women can do this too. So they kept it.
And a good thing too, because it's something we'll talk about later on. But an equally important part of the jigsaw is the fight, in a way, that you've had throughout your career to get to where you wanted to be, because of, I suppose, intrinsic biases in the system over time. I think before we go into too much detail on the science side, we should acknowledge that this is a little bit of a homecoming for you.
Yes. I'm delighted to be here, and especially to see all of you students interested in science. It really is such a great pleasure to know that Ireland is doing great work in bringing students into sciences. As we know, we don't really know what the futures hold as far as jobs are concerned, but science is expanding. All different sciences are expanding. And you studying science now will have a background that you'll be able to step into those new jobs. So it's extremely important that we have a strong group of people studying, young people studying here. And it's wonderful. My dad was born here in Offaly, and he was a farmer. And actually, farmers were the first scientists. They had to figure out all about soil and what plants grow where and how, and animal husbandry. So it wasn't really that I never knew science, but I never thought I'd be a scientist. But my dad emigrated to New York. He ran away from home because people didn't want their children to immigrate. This was a great sin. And so he had to sneak out. He hid his clothing in a ditch and went out to plow in the field, and then borrowed a bicycle and rode to Tullamore railroad station. And he had a suit of clothes made at Tullamore, and he changed into his clothes and took his farming clothes and put them back on the bicycle and sent them back, and got on the train, was getting on the train to Cobh, where the ship left. And his brother went out into the field looking for him, and they couldn't find him. And they guessed that he had run away. So his brother, Jim, got on a horse and went and got the priest, and the two of them raced to the Tullamore railroad station, but the train had gone. So if they had caught him, I wouldn't be here today. So my dad met my mom on the ship. She was from Kerry, and they moved to New York, and after a number of years got married and raised 5 children. I was the middle of 5. And we always kept our connections to Ireland. We used to march in the St. Patrick's Day Parade every year in New York. It's the oldest St. Patrick's Day Parade in the world. It started in 1898, I believe, was the first. And it's a great parade. It lasts for hours. And the counties march together. People from various counties march together. Offaly is always a small county, and Kerry is a big county. And so there were always a large number of people. So what my mother would make us do was first march with Kerry, and then we had to go back and march with Offaly so that we didn't take sides. So I came back with my dad. First time he saw his mother, he returned 23 years later, and he took 2 of his children, I was 1, and my sister, and we went to Monaghan, where he was born, and we stayed for 3 months in Ireland and had a wonderful time. And we've always been very close to our Offaly relatives. because we stayed there more than we did in Kerry. My Kerry grandmother was somewhat stern and disapproving of us, so when we got to Offaly, my Granny Guinan just thought the world of us, and so we knew where the good place was to stay.
And I think with a Kerry-Offaly combination in the house, it's possibly just as well you weren't in Ireland, given some of the matches that have happened down through the years.
Yes.
So you mentioned the importance of young people and if they have an interest in science and a passion for science, and the importance of encouraging them to pursue that. And what struck me looking at your biography, and even my wife commented, she said, a medical detective, an epidemiologist. I didn't even really know there was such a job, and if I'd known that, that's what I would have wanted to do. So nowadays you can actually you can go to university and study this kind of thing, but when you were studying, it wasn't really an option. Can you tell us a bit about how you came to the line of work that you excelled in?
Yes, well, I never thought of being a scientist. I went through high school and then went to college in New York City. In my father died before I went to college, and New York City had these wonderful universities, the City University of New York, which were free. And not only were they free, but you only paid $20 a semester to rent all the books you needed for any class you were taking, so that immigrants of all kinds went to the university and it had very high standards. You had to keep your grades up. So when we graduated, we would have a really good education, and that's how many of the immigrants' families moved forward and found the American dream. It was through education. Our parents were like most immigrant parents. They told us, you have to get an education. That was the most important thing that you could do. And everyone thought that way. We never even questioned that we were going to college. We didn't know how it was going to happen, but we knew we were going from the day we could understand. That's what was going to happen. Our parents understood. They had not had the education that they wanted. And so I started at Hunter College at the City University of New York. And when I was there, I took the first required courses. One of them was chemistry. And the chemistry professor, after I finished that semester, called me into his office, and I was really nervous because I thought maybe I had done poorly. And he said to me, you do well in chemistry. You're good at this. You should consider majoring in this. And I said, oh no, I know I'm not a scientist. He said, well, why don't you take the next semester and see how you do, and then decide. And so I did. And I think that's a very important thing for teachers to say to students who are good. Because my parents didn't know much about chemistry, so they wouldn't know whether I was good in it or not. But someone told me that I was good at something. And I think when someone tells you that, it gives you the confidence to move forward, that you say, well, maybe I can do this. And so I majored in chemistry. And when I graduated from college, as a chemistry major, I couldn't find a job. And in those years, the New York Times want ads. When you were looking for jobs, you went to the major newspaper, and there were listings by gender. It was this help wanted female and help wanted male. And there was never a job for women in the health wanted female. So I had a choice of applying for the job that were in the male column, or try and find another way of finding a job. And and I finally found one after many, many months of trying. And it was in a chewing gum factory. Can you imagine? It was Warner Lambert Pharmaceutical Companies, the American Chicle division. They made chiclets and chewing gum. And I was a flavor chemist. So I made different flavors. They were trying to develop different products, new products with different flavors. So I was experimenting with different flavors. And one of the first things they wanted me to do, I was the only woman working there, the only chemist working there. And I guess they thought that this would be a good job for me, that they wanted me to develop a product called kissing gum. And they wanted it kind of to be bright pinkish red, and thought that that would be just wonderful. And so one of the problems I had with trying to make this gum was the sugar on the gum. You know, when you have a chewing gum, you open it up and there's that white sugar on the top. Well, it would change the pink and it would look very whitish. So I got this great idea to dye the sugar pink. And then when the sugar went on the, I thought it was a great idea, to cover the gum with pink sugar. And we did it, there's a pilot plant in the factory where we start and looked at it, and it looked really good when we started it. And then I had to convince the head of the manufacturing unit to start this new product. What he had to do was stop all production to try this new product and see how it worked. And he was a tough guy, and that's why my boss hired me. He figured that that boss would be nicer to a girl than a guy. So I would go up and say, "Would you please, my boss will kill me if you don't let me do this." Of course, that wasn't true, but I played on that. And so they put the whole operation started, this huge factory, you couldn't imagine the size of it. And with the sugar went up all over the place and turned the place pink. So that this one poor guy came up to me and said to me, look at me, look what you've done to me. You're ruining my life." And so it didn't work. I thought it was a good idea. Anyway, that's what I was doing. And I thought I was getting paid pretty well, but I found out that the people who were hired after me were making more money than I was, and all the men were making more money than I was. And that was somewhat discouraging. And I thought, well, maybe I should try and find another job or go to graduate school. And I applied to graduate school, and I was rejected from most because they didn't accept women in graduate programs in chemistry. So while I was working on chewing gum, a colleague came in and told me that President Kennedy had been killed. Our president had been killed. And we, of course, numb with shock. And President Kennedy, when he was inaugurated, had said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And I decided that I was going to try and join the astronaut program, because President Kennedy had this wonderful plan within 10 years to reach the moon. And they needed scientists, so they were begging for people to study science and get doctorate degrees in science so they could be part of the program. And so I applied to the University of Texas, and the reason I did was they were advertising in a medical journal for graduate students, that they had funding for graduate students. And the University of Texas at Galveston was just a few miles away from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, that's NASA. And that's where the astronauts were training. And Charles Berry, who was the medical director of the program, had an appointment at the University of Texas. So I thought, well, if I went to the University of Texas, I'd have a leg up on trying to get into the astronaut program. And but my mentor, Dr. Guest, who was the chair of the Department of Physiology, when I told him what I wanted to do, he advised me not to tell anyone because he felt that people would make fun of me. He said, first, finish your degree program and then see what you can do. They have to know what kind of work you can do. So I majored in aviation and space medicine. I studied blood coagulation because there were problems with when astronauts went up in space that the lack of gravity would stop the blood, slow the blood down, it would clot. So there were lots of reasons to study how circulation of the blood was affected by space. And I graduated the year before I graduated, I went to NASA and took a course with other potential astronauts who were interested in becoming astronauts. And I was the only woman in the class, and there were 13 or 14 people in the class. And we took the class, and after the class finished the last day, we were given a form, which was a form that told us what the physical requirements were for being an astronaut. And so we had to fill out the form to see what physical requirements, what our physical abilities were. And it turned out that I was the only one that completed the form that could pass all of the physical, because you had to have 20/20 vision, but you also had to fit in the capsule. In the early stage of the space program, you had to be rather small to fit into the capsule. So the other men in the class either wore glasses or were too big to fit in the capsule. But I was not invited to apply to the program. And if you've ever seen Houston Central, any of the movies, you know that it was that's where the central operating system was for space. I found out that they did not allow women into Houston Central, even to deliver coffee, because they might distract the men. And so Dr. Guest told me, and I told him that I was unlikely to be selected if I couldn't even go into the central place. And so, and he agreed that perhaps this was not the time. And so I left Texas and went and did a postdoctoral fellowship at the National Institute of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. I'm working in blood coagulation, and that's what I thought I would be doing. When I was there, I was trying for a job, I couldn't find a job, and at NIH, all the jobs, the requirements were that you had to have a medical degree. And when I would apply for a job, people would say, listen, I'd take you in a minute if you had an MD, but all you have is a PhD. And so you're not qualified. So I applied to medical school, and I applied to 2 medical schools in Maryland where I was working. One was Johns Hopkins University, and one was the University of Maryland, the state school. Well, I was rejected from the University of Maryland, the state school, and I was accepted at Johns Hopkins University, and I had no idea why. I was accepted because Johns Hopkins was a much more prestigious university, and I would have thought I would have gotten into the University of Maryland, but not Johns Hopkins, and I found out when I got there that the donor, when Johns Hopkins University opened, they didn't have enough money to open the hospital in the 1900s. And they asked a local woman who had inherited a lot of money to donate the money to help open Johns Hopkins Hospital. Her name was Mary Elizabeth Garrett. And my name is Mary Elizabeth Guinan. So Mary Elizabeth Garrett said that she would donate the money if they would admit women to the medical school on an equal basis. And of course they said, of course we won't do that. But they couldn't get the money. So finally, after several years, they accepted Mary Elizabeth Garrett's money, and they have in there that women had to be admitted on the same basis of men. However, that same basis was 10% for many years. So I imagine one of the reasons that I was accepted, that I was part of the 10% that was there. So I finished medical school, and I kept thinking I was going to be a hematologist, and but there was a war going on, the Vietnam War then, and we had a problem at Kent State University where students at the university were protesting the war, and the National Guard was called out, and many were killed and injured. And I was horrified at that. My parents told me that America was the greatest country in the world, and that we could do anything we want at freedom. And I was very worried at the time that this was what was happening in the United States, that killing unarmed students, and that my government was doing that. And our parents always told us that we should be giving back because of all the wonderful things that we had received by being American citizens. And so I decided I wanted to do something else, but I didn't know. And then I heard about this smallpox eradication program about in a medical magazine, where all of the countries of the world, 165 countries, can you imagine, had gotten together and agreed that they would work together to eliminate smallpox in 10 years. Smallpox was a terrible disease that had been known since the beginning of history to really wipe out populations. And probably 2 million or so people died every year from smallpox.
Sorry for cutting across you, but it's something that most of the audience here, given the age profile, have no appreciation of at all, just how bad the smallpox was.
It was so horrible. Of course, I had never seen a case, but just knew the description because there was no smallpox in the United States then. And but it would if you didn't die from smallpox, you could be blinded or scarred for life. And that scarring, especially in many countries, kept people, they became ostracized from society because of their pockmarked skin, especially women who were no longer considered suitable for marriage. And pregnant women and children were most susceptible to the disease. It was very, very painful. There was no way to sort of help the patient with the pain. Nothing soothed it. So there's constant pain. And so I decided I wanted to do that. I wanted to be part of this program. And I found out that our government, the government of the United States, was part of it, was a big part of it. And I found every country in the world had an agency that related to the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization was the leader of the smallpox eradication program. but the United States had a large role in it. And at that time, there was the Cold War, and we in the Soviet Union were at odds on almost everything. And but one of the things that happened was they joined forces during the Smallpox Eradication program. In fact, Russia, the Soviet Union, donated all of the vaccine for the whole worldwide eradication program. The United States similarly donated many things, and especially personnel. They were sending people over. And I found that the agency in the United States who did that was an agency called the Center for Disease Control at that time. That was its name. And it was, at that time, it wasn't very well known. It was formed in Georgia, and it's the only agency of the United States government that has headquarters outside of the Washington, D.C. area, so that politicians never came to Georgia, so that we were pretty safe from a lot of political activity because we weren't in the Washington, D.C. area, and and CDC remains in Georgia, in Atlanta, Georgia. So that's when I went to, I applied for something called the Epidemic Intelligence Service. I had never heard of the Epidemic Intelligence Service. And this was a program that trained people as epidemiologists to understand and collect data on what's happening in the communities. You collect data on what diseases are happening and how to control them. And the CDC was the agency that would be called out whenever there was an outbreak of any disease or unknown problem. They asked that EIS officers would be called out to investigate. And you were trained how to investigate and contain an epidemic. So I enjoyed that. And then while there was a call for people to go for the EIS officers, as they were called, to go to India in the smallpox eradication program. India was one of the last states that was infected with smallpox, and there were just 2 areas. So I decided, I volunteered. I was rejected several times, and I was told that India wasn't accepting, that WHO wasn't accepting women into the program. And then I was told that India wasn't accepting women in the program. So I asked to speak to the director of the program, and I said, Indira Gandhi is the Prime Minister of India, and I wonder if she knows that American women scientists are banned from going to India in the smallpox eradication program. So do you think I should write directly to Indira Gandhi, or should I write to the Indian embassy and ask some clarification on this issue? And he said, I'll get back with you. And 1 week later, I was accepted to go to India in the smallpox eradication program.
And India at that time, I mean, anybody who's been to India, maybe there are significant differences in terms of transport and everything nowadays. I can only imagine, 30 years ago there were even more significant differences.
Yes, I mean, it was where the smallpox was they were in 2 states, in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, and these are very remote areas in India. And I was sent to Uttar Pradesh, and it's up by Nepal, and very remote. There was a 99% illiteracy rate, no electricity. The people lived in mud huts, like they had for thousands of years. They had no real connection to the outside world. During the rainy season, the mud huts would melt, and then they'd build them up again. for the following year. And that's how they lived for generations. They had really never seen a foreigner. And how we used to work was the World Health Organization would assign us a jeep, a Mahindra Jeep was an Indian jeep, and a driver and a paramedical assistant who worked as your cook, interpreter, and all-around handy person. And what we would do was, this is how you search. How do you search smallpox? The method that you do it is search and containment. It was called search and containment, surveillance and containment. So how do you find smallpox? How do you find where it is? And what we taught, we would go, the team, the three of us, the driver and Shafi Muhammad, my assistant, who was Muslim. The driver was Hindu. And of course, I didn't speak either Urdu or Hindi, only English. And the driver only spoke Hindi, but Shafi spoke all three. So he managed to interpret for all of us. And as we would go with a card with a picture of a baby with smallpox or a picture of an adult with smallpox, and we would ask the villagers, have you seen anyone with this disease? And if you have, and you can take us to the case, we'll pay you 10 rupees. In that year, 10 rupees was a lot of money to give to someone in the village. So there was a great search. So if there was a case, people would bring you to the case. Sometimes it was chicken pox, but we had to be smallpox. And if so, then what we had to do was quarantine the case, vaccinate everyone within a 10-mile radius, because smallpox is transmitted from person to person. There's no other way to get smallpox except from another person. And it spreads locally. It doesn't spread in the air around. So if you can contain that case, then you have stopped the spread of that case. And that's how we used to do it. We'd go from village to village, and I was the source of great interest then, because I was obviously tall and blonde, and although I wore something over my head, I was clearly a foreigner. So all of the women would come out to see and look at me, and they'd want me to come into their hut, and I did, but they wouldn't let the interpreter into the hut, so we were never able to talk. We just talked in sign language, and they kept asking me. Indian women had babies every year, and so they couldn't understand why I didn't have babies, and they would be asking me, "Where's your baby?" I'd say, "Not yet." And so should I go on?
Yeah, well, again, just from your book, you had an interesting story about how you got around the problems of getting across all the rivers in India.
Yes, well, we had, during this 10-mile radius in one very remote area, we had this three rivers cutting through the areas that we had to cross, and the Jeep wouldn't go through the river. It would, and I couldn't wade across. I did one very embarrassing thing that I'll admit to now. I thought that I could wade across the river, and so I always wore pants, and I rolled up the legs of my pants to go across the river, and there was nobody there at the time, but by the time I got to the other side of the river, a big crowd had gathered and was staring at me in horror. And I realized then that I had broken a taboo. Indian women were not to show their legs. And here I had rolled up my legs, and so I never tried that again. And although I tried to keep it quiet, somehow that got back to WH headquarters in Delhi, and I was kidded about that for many years and how I had transgressed. So trying to get across the river then became a difficult problem, and what we did was there was sometimes a boatman would come down in the small wooden boat with hand standing up with a stick, moving the boat, and we would ask, and Shafi would negotiate to see if he'd take us across the river. Sometimes he would, sometimes he wouldn't. And camels came through all the time, carrying goods from one place to another. And we would try to negotiate with the camel drivers if they would take us across the river with all our equipment and needles and vaccines. And sometimes they would do it, and sometimes they wouldn't, because the camels were carrying a lot of heavy baggage. So, but the camels were really not very nice. They knew that I was a foreigner, probably. And when I got on the camel's back, the camel would turn around and look at me and bite me on the arm. And that consistently happened every time I got on a camel. The camel would turn around. It was almost like he looked at me and said, "You don't belong here," and bit me, or tried to shake me off the saddle. And so it was very difficult trying to get across the rivers, and it's extremely important to do so because we were afraid that smallpox was spreading in those villages, and we had to get there. So one day, as I was in the village, I see in the distance, I had never seen another vehicle except the Jeep when I was there in this remote area. And one day I see this car coming down and dirt swirling all around, so I couldn't even see. It was covered with dirt. It came speeding down and pulled up beside me, and this young man jumped out, very effervescent, said, "I'm so-and-so, and I'm here to, how are you? What are you doing here?" And he spoke perfect English. And I said, "Oh, I'm with the Smallpox Eradication Program." And he said, "Yes, I heard." He said, "And I also heard that you're having trouble crossing the river." And I said, "Yes, we are." And he said, "Well, I'm going to give you something to help. I'm going to give you my elephant." And it was not clear to me how the elephant was going to help. And I wasn't sure if I could handle having an elephant. And I was going to graciously say, "Well, thank you, but I don't think we can use one." And he turned around and he said, "Oh, here's the elephant coming now. It's coming in the distance." And I see this elephant bouncing down. And the man said, "Oh, I drive too fast. The elephant can't keep up with me." And here comes, and the whole village came out to see, and the driver of the elephant, which is called a mahout, was there with his beautiful white robes and a turban. And he comes down, and the young man insisted that he show me how the elephant could swim. So the whole village came down. We went down to the river, and I had to mount on the elephant. Indian elephants, about 9 feet high, the back, and so you have to climb up. They had a hemp ladder that they rolled down, and it was very difficult for me to manage it because it kept swinging back and forth, and I tried to get up, but finally made it up to the young man told the elephant driver that if water went over the elephant's back, the elephant was to pick me up in his trunk and hold me up so I wouldn't get wet. And of course I didn't hear this, it was all in Hindi. And my paramedical assistant explained to me what was going to happen, and I said, "No, I'm not going to do that. We can't do that." And so what we did was we went on the elephant and swam across, and the elephant took the mahout, the elephant driver, up when the water came over, not me. So then the elephant came back, and we use the elephant every day. The elephant is a sign of great wealth in India because it's very expensive to feed the elephant. So the elephant went home every night and got fed and then came back. So we eventually successfully vaccinated all of the villages.
Well, I think it's probably ranks among one of the greatest achievements of mankind, the smallpox eradication program, in terms of the number of people it has affected and benefited. We'd just like to move along to talk about the other great epidemic that you were on the front line of dealing with, the HIV epidemic, which is still ongoing. But at the time when you were working for the CDC, HIV was unknown. It hadn't even a name at that stage. Can you tell us a little bit about, I suppose, the early days when you were involved in identifying this epidemic and trying to characterize it by dealing with some of the patients?
Well, working at CDC, I found people would call you, doctors around the nation would call you because they were experts at CDC, and people would call and say, we're seeing this strange disease and in gay men, and we wonder if there's some new thing happening. And we would talk to each other and say, we've been hearing something about this thing, but we never could quite get a handle on it until one doctor in Los Angeles, Dr. Michael Gottlieb, sent us an article saying there were 5 men who had this very strange disease. Their immune system was depressed and they had all these diseases, and 2 of them had died and they didn't know what it was, and they asked if we would publish it in the newsletter of CDC, which is called the MMWR. The newsletter goes out to everyone, goes out throughout the world every week, and notifies the public health community of the dangers that are present and how to control them. And so and how that would get into the MMWR is somebody with expertise in the disease would have to clear it through the system. But since it was a new disease and there was nobody who was an expert in it, many of the men had herpes virus infections, the cytomegalovirus, which is a herpes virus infection. And I was that time the expert on herpes virus infections, sexually transmitted herpes virus infections. And so that I was given the article and asked if it should be printed. And we went through our system and it was printed. And but it was so sensitive that because it was all 5 gay men who had this disease, 2 of whom had died. But saying gay in that publication, people thought that was inappropriate. But of course it was a very important thing to say. So the title of the story became, the disease that manifested itself was called pneumocystis pneumonia. And it was called pneumocystis pneumonia in Los Angeles. And it wasn't, so the title wouldn't say anything to people, but within the body of the article, homosexual was said, a homosexual man. That was the first time in the history of CDC that the word homosexual had been used in that publication, and that's how sensitive it was. And when that happened, then the world learned about it. Weeks after, we were inundated with phone calls from people saying, I have a case, I have a case, I have a case, I have a case. And then another thing happened, that now they found that a number of gay men had developed this tumor called Kaposi sarcoma, and that became another, and that's what started our investigations, and it became one of the largest investigations in the history of the United States and probably the world, to find out what the cause was and how to contain it.
And have in mind that we have some classes here who will have to return to school, unfortunately, on a sunny day. Your book contains an awful lot more information about that story, and I'd really encourage anybody who's excited by the brief taste that we've been able to give them to get the book and have a read. One last question I just want to ask you, and then we'll open up to the floor for some questions. It's a bit of a philosophical one, but if you had unlimited resources and carte blanche from the WHO, what health problem in today's world would you tackle?
I would attack Zika virus infection. This is a very, very serious problem. And it's serious because it's causing horrible birth defects in pregnant women who get infected. And until recently, it was only thought to be transmitted by a certain mosquito called the Aedes aegypti mosquito. But very recently, we found out that it's sexually transmitted. Now we can control the mosquito. We have lots of ways of controlling the mosquito to keep it from biting people. And there's protection that people can use, like during the Olympics, use to protect themselves from the mosquitoes. But it's very difficult because the infection often is totally asymptomatic. We know that men can carry it and carry the virus for months and months after they're infected, even when they have no symptoms, and they don't know they had the disease. So they may come home and infect their wives, girlfriends, however. So it's extremely difficult to know that someone is infected if someone from an infected area comes. But the women probably are the most at risk because of their damage, because the damage is done to the fetus. The virus actually feeds on the brain of the fetus and causes massive destruction and almost very, very terrible fetal outcomes. And how are we going to prevent that? And one of the things that we have to do is to try and ensure that women who do not want to get pregnant have safe and effective birth control under the control of women. People saying, oh yes, we'll use condoms. Well, condoms are very ineffective contraceptive, mostly because they're not used. And it's really important that we in the United States, and we're doing it in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is 28% of the pregnant women in Puerto Rico are high school children in secondary school. We need to make sure right now for prevention that all of the states in the United States ensure that that women who do not want to get pregnant have access to safe and effective birth control to prevent they might not be able to prevent the infection, but we can prevent the terrible outcome if we reduce the population of pregnant women by making sure that they use birth control. Many doctors are now saying to women, do not get pregnant, because even women who have been infected, we don't know how long they keep the virus. So it's a very, very, very dangerous bug. And I foresee that we really have to ensure that we have protection against this virus.
And I think really the key message is information and education, and ensuring that the most accurate and up-to-date information about the virus is out there, and that people are accessing it and have access to it.
Yes, but they have to have access. For example, in Brazil, there isn't good access to women to birth control. And it's really important that that be part of the program and not, well, there's condoms.
Okay, so I think we will open for a couple of questions briefly from the floor.
What advice do you have for the young students that are here about being involved in STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math? What would you say to the young students that are here about engaging in that?
Yes, I think it's wonderful to see you all here and who are interested in science. We don't know what the jobs of the future are going to be, but we know that they're going to involve technology and science in many ways. And it's really important that our students get educated in this area, because once you have a foundation in science, you'll be able to move into the areas that are opening up. There are all sorts of new sciences, and it's very important that we cover all of them. So for you here, congratulations to you all who are in science, and keep up that good work. And don't worry if you don't do well sometimes. Keep going, because some of us don't do well in many things and make mistakes or do something maybe not do so well. One of the things that we do as human beings is we always remember the bad things. So you're better than we remember the good things. So if you remember, oh, well, I didn't do well in that, I'm not going to do that, but you have done well in all these other things, you don't reinforce that positivity. I use as an example the tennis players. If you see Rafa Nadal or Serena Williams play, and when they do something good, they give a fist pump. So give yourself a fist pump when you do well. And of course, when you don't do well, you have to improve. But always remember that you've been doing some good things so that you have a positive belief that you can keep moving forward, because we need you. We need you. Ireland needs you for the future of the country. Thank you.
It's my very pleasant duty just to say a word of thanks to Dr. Guinan for being here today and sharing some interesting stories from what has been a really inspiring career in science. I hope it will inspire some of you to consider a career in science or technology when you see how much one person can achieve in a single career. I think you're a great illustration of an Irish saying that you can take the person out of Ireland, but you can't take the Irish out of the person. So thank you very much for giving of your time to come back here today. So as the years pass, science and technology are going to become an ever bigger part of all our lives. There are a lot of exciting things will be achieved over the next generation. So please give it your consideration. And in the short term, keep an eye out for the Midlands Science Festival later in the year. I hope you'll participate in it. Thank you all very much.